I never thought a simple dream could change my life. But here I am, sharing the story of how my nightmares became all too real. It all started about a year ago, when I had the first of many strange and terrifying dreams. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone has bad dreams sometimes, right? But as the nights went on, the dreams grew worse, and eventually, they began to follow me into my waking life. It started with a hallway. I was walking down a long, dark corridor. The walls were old, covered in faded wallpaper that was peeling off in some places. There was no light except for a dim glow at the far end, and my footsteps echoed eerily as I walked. I didn't know where I was going or why I was there, but something told me I needed to keep moving. As I walked, I started to hear another set of footsteps behind me, soft at first but gradually growing louder. Someone, or something, was following me. I wanted to turn around, to see who or what was there, but I couldn't. It was as if my body was frozen, locked in place as I continued to walk forward. I could only catch glimpses of a shadow behind me, just out of sight, always staying at the edge of my vision. My heart began to race. I tried to walk faster, hoping to get away from whatever was behind me, but no matter how quickly I moved, the footsteps kept pace. They never got closer, but they never fell behind either. The fear began to build inside me, growing stronger with every step I took. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was low and raspy, almost like a growl, and it sent a chill down my spine. "Ethan," the voice said, soft but clear. I froze. How did it know my name? The whisper came again, louder this time, as if it was right next to my ear. "Ethan, you can't run!" Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. The hallway seemed endless, stretching on forever with no sign of an exit. The walls began to close in around me, and the whispers grew louder, filling my head with their eerie chant. "Ethan, come back, you can't escape." Finally, I saw a door at the end of the hallway. It was old and battered, hanging crookedly on its hinges, but it was my only way out. I sprinted toward it, the voices chasing me, growing more desperate and angry. I could feel something cold and sharp at my back, as if whatever was following me was reaching out to grab me. I burst through the door, and suddenly, I was outside. The change was so abrupt that it took me a moment to realize where I was. I was standing in the middle of a deserted street in a suburban neighborhood. The houses were all dark, their windows staring blankly at me like empty eyes. The sky was a sickly gray, casting a cold, lifeless light over everything. For a moment I thought I was safe, but then I felt it again, that presence, the one that had been following me. It was still there, watching me. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was close. The whispers had stopped, but the air was heavy with a sense of dread, as if something terrible was about to happen. I looked around, trying to find a place to hide, but every house looked the same, and every window was dark. Then, at the end of the street, I saw a house I recognized, a house from my childhood. I hadn't thought about that house in years, but seeing it now filled me with a deep sense of unease. It was as if the house itself was calling to me, pulling me toward it. Against my better judgment, I started walking toward the house. The front door was ajar, creaking softly in the wind. The house looked old and abandoned, the paint peeling off the walls and the windows boarded up. Every instinct told me to turn back, to run away and never look back, but I couldn't stop myself. It was as if something else was controlling my movements. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me with a loud bang that echoed through the empty house. I was trapped. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the darkness was so complete that I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The only sound was the faint dripping of water somewhere in the distance. And then I heard it again, the whisper. "Ethan!" The voice was coming from upstairs, from my old bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't ignore the call. I had to see who, or what, was up there. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The closer I got to the top, the stronger the pull became, drawing me toward that room. I reached the door and pushed it open, revealing the small, cramped space that I hadn't seen in years. The room was exactly as I remembered it, down to the smallest detail. The old bed with its tattered blanket, the cracked mirror on the wall, and the little wooden chair by the window. But there was something else, something new. A figure stood by the bed, its back turned to me. It was a man, tall and thin, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt. His head was bent at an unnatural angle, as if his neck had been broken. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, but I knew he was aware of me. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Then, slowly, the figure turned to face me. His eyes were empty sockets, black holes that seemed to swallow the light. His mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, a smile that didn't belong on a human face. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice raspy and cold. "You can't escape." I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, trapped by his gaze. The figure stepped closer, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I could feel the cold emanating from him, seeping into my bones, numbing me. He reached out a hand, long and bony, his fingers like claws. As he touched my chest, a searing pain shot through me, and I knew I was going to die. This was it. The nightmare had become reality, and there was no escape. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I was back in my bed, the morning light streaming through the window. It was just a dream, I told myself. Just a dream. But as I sat up, trying to calm my racing heart, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I looked down and saw it, 3 deep scratches, fresh and bleeding, right where the figure had touched me in the dream. And then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, coming from the shadows of my room, a whisper. "Ethan, you can't escape." Waking up from that nightmare should have been the end of it. I should have been able to shake it off as just a bad dream, but the scratches on my chest told a different story. They were real, fresh, and deep, as if something had truly clawed at me while I slept. The reality of those marks sent a chill down my spine, filling me with a dread I couldn't shake. 4 days after the nightmare, I was on edge. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking figure, every whisper of the wind sounded like that eerie voice calling my name. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the scratches were just a bizarre coincidence. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong, something beyond explanation. I became obsessed with finding answers. I spent hours online, searching for stories of other people who had experienced similar things. To my horror, I found countless accounts of people who had suffered from nightmares that seemed to bleed into reality. Some described seeing shadowy figures in their dreams, just like I had, while others spoke of waking up with injuries they couldn't explain. But none of the stories I read offered a solution, only more fear. People spoke of being haunted by their nightmares, of the dreams growing more frequent and intense until they couldn't tell where the dream ended and reality began. Some claimed they were being stalked by something from the other side, something that wanted to drag them back into the darkness forever. As the days turned into weeks, the nightmares returned. Every night, I found myself back in that endless hallway, the shadowy figure always behind me, always whispering my name. And every night, I woke up with new marks on my body, scratches, bruises, even bite marks. I was terrified to go to sleep, but no matter how hard I tried to stay awake, exhaustion would eventually take over, pulling me back into the nightmare. My friends and family noticed the change in me. I became withdrawn, jumpy, always looking over my shoulder as if expecting to see someone, or something, standing there. When I tried to explain what was happening, they either didn't believe me or thought I was losing my mind. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't been living it, I wouldn't have believed it either. One night, after weeks of torment, I decided to confront the nightmare head-on. I was desperate, willing to do anything to make it stop. I went to bed that night with a plan. When I found myself in the hallway again, I would stop running. I would turn around and face whatever was following me. Sure enough, I found myself back in the hallway. The same dimly lit corridor stretched out before me, the same shadowy figure lurking just out of sight behind me. But this time, instead of running, I took a deep breath and turned around. The figure was there, standing at the far end of the hallway, shrouded in darkness. It was taller than I had imagined, towering over me even from a distance. Its eyes were empty sockets, just as they had been in my previous dream, and its mouth twisted into that same grotesque grin. "Ethan," it whispered, but this time, I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest, and demanded to know what it wanted. The figure didn't answer right away. It just stood there, grinning at me, as if amused by my question. Then, slowly, it began to move toward me, its steps slow and deliberate, each one echoing through the hallway like a death knell. "You can't escape," it whispered again, and I realized then that it wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to stop until it had me. There was no running from it, no hiding. It would follow me wherever I went, in my dreams and in my waking life, until it finally claimed me. But I wasn't ready to give up. I refused to believe that this was my fate, that I was doomed to be haunted by this creature forever. I thought about the stories I had read, about the people who had faced similar nightmares. Some of them had fought back, had found ways to break free from the cycle. If they could do it, then so could I. I took a step forward, toward the figure, and then another. My fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my resolve, but I pushed it aside. I had to confront this thing, to find out what it wanted and how to stop it. As I moved closer, the figure's grin faded, replaced by something else, something that almost looked like fear. I realized then that it wasn't used to being challenged, that it fed off fear and despair. By standing up to it, I was disrupting its power, weakening its hold on me. "Leave me alone," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You don't belong here. You have no power over me." The figure hesitated, its empty eyes narrowing as if it was trying to figure out what to do next. For a moment, I thought it might disappear, that I had won. But then, it lunged at me, faster than I could react, its clawed hand reaching out to grab me. I woke up with a scream, my heart pounding in my chest. I was back in my bed, the morning light streaming through the window. My body was covered in cold sweat, and I could still feel the sting of the figure's claws where they had touched me. But something was different this time. The dread that had been hanging over me for weeks was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. The scratches on my body were still there, but they no longer bled or ached. They were just marks, fading scars from a battle that had finally ended. I don't know what happened that night, whether I truly defeated the creature or if it simply decided to leave me alone. But the nightmares stopped after that. I was finally able to sleep peacefully again, without the fear of being hunted in my dreams. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. The marks on my chest have faded, but they're still there, a reminder of the terror I faced. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the darkness presses in, I think I hear it, the faintest whisper carried on the wind. "Ethan, you can't escape." Even though the nightmares stopped, the experience left a permanent mark on me. I couldn't return to the life I had before. I became obsessed with understanding what had happened to me, why I had been targeted by that creature, and if there were others like it out there. I began researching everything I could about nightmares, sleep paralysis, and entities that could cross over from dreams into the real world. I spent hours poring over ancient texts, folklore, and modern psychology, trying to find an explanation. The more I learned, the more I realized how little we understand about the world of dreams. There were stories from all over the world of people who had encountered similar beings, shadowy figures that haunted their dreams, feeding off their fear. Some cultures believed these creatures were demons, others thought they were spirits of the dead, trapped between worlds. But no matter the explanation, the stories all shared one common theme. Once these creatures found you, they never truly left. I started attending support groups for people who had experienced sleep paralysis and other sleep disorders. I listened to their stories, shared my own, and found some comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. But even among those who had suffered from terrifying dreams, my story was different. Most people's experiences were brief, fleeting episodes of fear that left them shaken but unharmed. But mine had crossed a line, becoming something more than just a dream. As time went on, I tried to move on with my life. I went back to work, reconnected with friends and family, and tried to push the memories of that dark hallway and the figure within it to the back of my mind. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that moved when it shouldn't have, a whisper just on the edge of hearing. And I would remember the promise it had made. You can't escape. It's been almost a year now since my nightmares first began, and while the fear has faded, it's never truly left me. I still sleep with the light on, still check the shadows before I go to bed, still listen for that whisper in the dark. I don't know if the figure will ever return, if it's waiting for the right moment to strike again, or if I've truly banished it from my life. But one thing is certain, I'll never forget what happened to me. I'll never forget the terror of that hallway, the feeling of being hunted, the cold touch of those claws on my skin. And I'll never stop wondering, was it just a nightmare? Or did I glimpse something far darker, something that exists just beyond the edges of our reality? I guess I'll never know for sure. But for now, I can only hope that the nightmare has ended, that the figure has moved on to haunt someone else, and that I can finally find some peace. But every night, as I close my eyes, I wonder, what if it's not over? What if the nightmare is just waiting, biding its time, ready to return when I least expect it? And then, in the stillness of the night, I think I hear it, that faint whisper that sends a shiver down my spine. Ethan, you can't escape. And I realize, with a sinking heart, that the nightmare never truly ends. It's always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when my guard is down, when the darkness closes in, and the whispers start again. Because in the end, maybe the nightmare wasn't just in my dreams. Maybe it's something far worse. Something that's always been there, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows and into the light. And maybe, just maybe, there's no escaping it after all.